So we decided a year ago or more than a year ago that we would explore the idea of food, all aspects of food in our garden for the next 3 seasons. So we have just completed our first season, and this is what I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit today. It was a real radical departure from us. We've been here for 40 years, and our emphasis has always been on ornamental horticultural display. And we sort of approached this with quite a bit of trepidation, to be honest. I think all of us have had vegetable gardening experience at home and know what it typically looks like by August, even with our best intentions and not going to the beach for a month. Stuff isn't always that pretty. And the staff was really quite concerned, the gardening staff in particular was quite concerned as to how that would work. But we decided, well, we're just going to jump in here and we're going to give it a shot and see what happens. Our process here at the gardens for any display is that by a certain date, in this case September 1st, we submit our crop request to our growing staff. That is, what do we want to grow? What do we want them to produce? And it has to be done by the planting date, which is any time between May 1st and June 1st. So we had to have plans together from the time that the theme was picked to September 1st. We had to get that together, have plans, have numbers, and turn that over to the production staff. And then the production staff had the daunting task of actually finding some of these obscure plants. And in some cases, they're used to growing things from plugs and not from seeds, and that doesn't always work with vegetables. So we had a sort of a learning curve on the production end, and then what would happen once we got them into the ground. The focus of food wasn't just about production of food. We thought we should look at all aspects of it, or at least get people thinking about all aspects of it. And we did some of that this year, and we'll be doing some different angles on it in the next couple of years. But some of the questions we asked ourselves is, where does food come from? What do we want to show, in other words? Where does food come from? In some cases, what do some of these plants even look like? I mean, I'd never seen rice, except in a box. So I'm thinking, okay, this rice, we're going to grow rice. We're going to grow rice in clay soil, in dry clay soil. Well, we can't be barefoot in the parks. I mean, this is against the rules. So what are we going to do here? And we thought perhaps there were people in our community that hadn't seen this, especially people of a certain age, and that wouldn't be you guys. What other aspects of food? What about food for beneficials, not just food for people? So we actually had a pollinator's garden, and you'll see a picture of that in a few minutes. I don't have a lot of pictures. I just have a lot of BS here this morning. So just the whole concept of food. And like I said, we'll be doing different aspects of that in the coming year, which I really will not talk about today. I'm going to talk about what we did and what we learned. We also decided that there might be many different ways of displaying food. And so we tried a lot of different things. And you'll see that in the pictures that are coming up. But food plants in the air on arbors. We had a pollinator's garden, as I mentioned. We had companion plantings. We had crop succession. So it wasn't just about some of the plants. It was also something about the techniques. The other mandate that we made for ourselves was, while we didn't go, I wouldn't say we were certifiably organic per se, we really did not use very many pesticides, and we only used them when we absolutely had to, if the entire display was threatened. And we did apply a small amount of pesticides on certain target crops. We also use a lot of compost that we make here ourselves, so there wasn't commercial fertilizers put out. But that's the way we do our displays anyway, so that wasn't anything new. We intentionally did not display these plants in traditional rows when we're talking about vegetable gardens. We wanted it to look something like this, and for next year, this particular space is going to look even different. Then we thought, well, what are some of the ways we can display these plants educationally? So we had some themes. Aside from the vegetable garden and some of the plants up in the air, we devoted one entire bed to grain-producing plants. So we call that our Great Grains bed. That was one of the gardener's ideas. We devoted one entire small bed to plants that revolve around the term of sweet or sweeteners. So we had stevia planted and sugar beets and sugar cane and sweet potatoes. That was a bit of a stretch, but it looked pretty good. So we thought that that might grab some people's attention too. And the thing that also worked with this was we intended to have a lot of interpretation. I think you have to when something isn't a screamingly beautiful plant and maybe it doesn't have fruit on it yet. And so through the auspices of Ellen Bennett, who's really good at this sort of thing, we ended up with some really amazing signs. So that was how we embarked upon this, biting our nails a little bit, but ready to give it a shot. And here are some of the things that we learned. There's a sort of an overview of, as if you were walking into the garden and thinking, what are they doing in here this year? This is one of our interpretive panels that sort of talks about, as you see, why food, why now? And so that was, I guess, in a way, our mantra. And it's still out in the garden. It'll be out there for 2-3 more years. There's others too, so you should go and look for them. This is the garden I was mentioning. This was the companion planting of vegetables and flowers. And this was a long, narrow garden which could easily be seen by people walking by. And it also featured succession planting. So there were a lot of crops that were actually sowed in place around the ones that we planted from pots. And then when these would burn out, as hot weather approached, there would be other plants put in. And then we actually sowed some fall crops. So that was one way that we displayed. And we actually found that this was pretty successful. This was the Great Grains plot. Now I know basil and marigolds are not grains, but they are adding some color and they are companion plantings. And we had soybeans, millets, sorghum, rice, and rapeseed. Not all seen in this picture, but you'll see another picture. That's how we grew rice in a bog, great big plastic tub. But the thing I liked about the way this was designed, and I didn't design any of these so I can say this, that was up close and personal. Kids could get right up on that wall and look at that and play with the rice. It was pretty fun. There's another example or another view of the Great Grains bed from the other side. And at the end of the season, this was quite dramatic because, of course, corn gets very tall. In fact, I believe it's about as tall as an elephant's eye, but I didn't measure that. Sorghum, millet. I have to say I had never seen some of these things grow myself. Another way we displayed, that's hyacinth bean. And while I think most of us think of that as an ornamental, the pods are actually edible. I have to give acknowledgement to our gardener, Jim Doremus, so I don't know if he's in the room, but he designed and shepherded this whole new arbor through the construction process in-house by our welder, and these are meant to stay up for several years. Also on this arbor were scarlet runner beans as a companion plant, and some other beans which you can't see because the hyacinth bean eventually ate them all. So here's some of the plants that worked really well, and without us having to do extraordinary measures. The okra can be kind of a boring plant, so we went with a couple of different cultivars that have red fruits, and they are edible fruiting types and are shorter, which is useful because we didn't want our okra as high as an elephant's eye. Cardoons. Cardoons were not only very happy in our climate, but also very dramatic gray accents. And you'll be seeing those return next year. And then we did have the regular tall green okra. And it had some issues, but in general it produced quite well. This was a real eye catcher and somewhat of a clothing catcher. The spiny bastard. And you can just imagine how that got its name. I don't have any pictures of the fruit, but they are orange, about this big and fuzzy. Everything on this plant has got sharp or fuzzy protrusions. It's related to eggplant. It's a solanaceous plant. The hyacinth bean, again. The scarlet runner bean. There were apparently differences of opinion as to how successful this was. Some of us thought they were really successful early in the season because they bloom. And they're actually get going a lot faster than the hyacinth beans. So at the first on the arbors, these worked pretty well. As the season progressed, they did get some issues with insect pests and then eventually got covered up immodestly by the hyacinth bean. Swiss chard in our climate. Who would have figured this would have worked so well in the heat? This is a plant that really likes a colder climate. This is the bright light Swiss chard, and it's grown from seed, and each of the plants has a different stem color. So you had a mixtures of yellows and reds and oranges, and it persisted all the way to the fall. Yep, and there's that rice coming right along. I don't have a picture of this, and I wish I did. One of the more dramatic designs that one of the gardeners came up with was there are many cultivars of rice that are ornamental, which of course I only knew from having seen internet pictures of the Japanese painting pictures in their rice fields with different colors of rice. We had red rice. The foliage is the color is burgundy. It's the color of the basil there and the rice flowers, which are really quite beautiful, as you can see down in the inset there. Quite spectacular, and these were in tall pots in the middle of fountains. So of course they were quite happy with the water. Very dramatic. And as I said, we had a pollinator's garden, which was one of the themes of the children's garden right behind this building, and a lot of the plants there produce nectar and pollen for beneficial insects to eat. So there was food for them as well. That's Angelica gigas in the inset. So that was what worked in a nutshell. What performed as expected? That basically means what you'd expect from your vegetable garden. Stuff looked good in the heat part that it likes. So some plants are cold crops and then they don't like the heat, and some plants don't like the cool and they like the heat. So our cabbages and kales and so forth basically looked pretty good at the beginning of the season, and then as the season progressed, they got loopers and they weren't all that happy. The one exception to this was we had the let me see if we get the right cultivar here. Well, Ruby Perfection cabbage was a black purple cabbage, and it really made these tight cabbage heads, and they really were a lot happier than this. We did get some beetles on them, and we did have to do some contact sprays so that they wouldn't be totally trashed, but they did end up looking really good throughout the whole season, and they were harvestable. I think this is bok choy, and I'm not completely certain that this looked great at the end of the season, but it was pretty dramatic at the beginning, and it evoked a lot of comments from people. And then there were some that we had to wait for. Instead of the gardens looking pretty good about a month after planting, the ones that really liked the heat took a while to get going. All those bare spots you see there, which our gardener termed at the moment negative space. We have euphemisms in horticulture too. Negative space, those are all different cultivars of sweet potato, and by frost you couldn't get down the walkway without a machete. Yeah, we had more damage to the sweet potatoes from strollers and walkers because they were all out into the path. So performance there was essentially seasonal. I think we could have adjusted that with a different design.
How much harvest did you get out of that?
I'll talk about harvest at the end. And then we had a few disappointments. The Brazilian oval orange eggplant. Well, I think what we did by having vegetables in the garden this year was we attracted the entire population of flea beetles in the state of Maryland. And flea beetles, if you don't know what they are the little tiny black things, and they basically eat all the foliage up really quick. And we did have to treat for them on some plants, but as you can see from the comments here, we had to take them out. Yep, the catalog for once didn't lie. These are cool season plants. They really don't work all that well in here. So that was something that we tried. Ground cherry, flea beetles, chipmunks, yum. And actually, I didn't think it was all that pretty myself, but then maybe it got prettier it would have gotten prettier as the season progressed had it lived. Pineapples. We had 6 pineapple plants that we brought in, and they actually fruited. despite the heat, and they were delicious. No, they did not go to the food bank. You only had 4 of them, and they were only this big. They were delicious. We're going to try it again as a pot plant, container plants for afternoon shade. All right, here's our great grains bed. That little green patch in the foreground, that's about as good as it ever looked. Rapeseed is, I don't know if that's what canola oil comes from or something like that, but it started coming up, and oh my God, it looked like somebody hit it with a flamethrower. By midsummer, the gardener had just thrown up his hands and said, this stuff's coming out of here. And he had to pull it out, and we probably should have put a sign up that said, watch the space, but we didn't, that late in the season, we didn't attempt anything. And that's a lesson. We probably could have. We probably could have thrown in some sort of summer grain or something like that, or sweet potatoes. More sweet potatoes. Taking cuttings from the bed, next door, or maybe some more okra. I don't know. Anyway, that was not exactly a grain, but that was something that we didn't expect, and it was so bad that we just couldn't spray. And that wasn't a happy place. The gardener had an idea that he could demonstrate some of these patio-type tomatoes, like you might be able to do on a terrace or balcony. And so we had these hay racks, and the tomatoes were in there, and they had to be watered constantly, and they got spider mites just unbelievably. I heard also that some people, when we ripped them out, some people took them home, put them in their gardens in pots, and they still had spider mites. So by then, I guess it was too late. He tried to replace them with sweet potatoes with the concept that they would grow anywhere, but they just required too much water, so the entire display top part had to come out. So those were some lessons that we learned. Now, that's all the pretty pictures, or the horror stories. Let me finish before I take questions. The bottom line was we were surprised at how good everything did overall. It didn't look that bad at the end of the season. We had some bare spots. We had some spots that we resowed as we had planned to do with fall crops. We had some disappointments. We had some things we didn't think would work, but we gave it a shot, as I said. We were surprised at how little vandalism we had. That may be a community thing. What Mark was talking about earlier. I don't know what it's like at Green Spring. It's not exactly a tough neighborhood, but perhaps if we had an orchard here where people could expect to get apples every year, they would come and do their shopping here. We did have some things disappear, and we expected that. We thought if we put up warning signs, it probably wouldn't do any good anyway. As far as critters, we did have certain plants, certain fruits that the chipmunks just went crazy for. We don't have deer in here. We do keep the geese under control, but we can't do a whole lot about the chipmunks. And so they took quite a few things away. But these were acceptable losses, and I think we were surprised by that. Now, as word gets out over the next two growing seasons, are we going to continue to have more, shall we say, unauthorized harvesting by our visitors? Probably. And all we can really do, I think, with that is discuss this when we should see it, or maybe put up some polite cautionary signs and just live with it. So we were surprised at that. The one thing that we learned, specifically plant-based, was that we had so much okra. You know what we should have done? Out here in the refreshments table, we should have had all of your pickled okras for appetizers. David took a lot of the okra home, 40, 50 pounds, and pickled it all up. It was so amazing that by midsummer, when it's hot, and okra, as you know, is a hot, loving crop, that every day here we watched okra. This is why I had to have this as my talisman. We had okra coming out of all sorts of places. Okay, other things that we learned that were not plant-based. We were really surprised at the response from a number of people, the emotional response that we got from some of our visitors. People kept going up and saying, I grew that when I lived in another country. or this was a staple of my youth, or the one I think that I thought was most touching was when people came up and went, I didn't know where that came from. And I felt the same way about rice. I'd never seen rice growing. You know, it's like, wow, that's pretty stuff. So we were successful with that emotional response, the copious memories. We hope to go with more of that again. We were surprised at how beautiful we could make things and how well that they worked, how long-lasting, almost without the use of any unusual care or pesticides. And we also were surprised that our visitors responded in general as well to having these displays as they would have lots and lots of pretty flowers. We had a few people who said, this isn't very interesting. Where are all the pretty flowers? Well, we had a bed of edible flowers for them, as a matter of fact. That was another way we thought of displaying things. Daylilies, yum. The other thing that we learned is that we will obviously change the composition next year based on the performance, the appeal, and even the harvest rate that we got from people. And we're going to change the vegetable garden around to show a bit more type backyard style gardens with plants from 4 geographic areas: Central America, Mexico, Southern Asia, and India, Asia, and the Mediterranean, Italy, and Greece. And what we're trying to do there is, again, play on that where people are from aspect. And so that's going to be sort of interesting. I can't speak a great deal yet. Somebody asked me the question about donating food. We did harvest a number of our crops, and we did give them to local, what did we give them to, Ellen? Food banks. I don't have statistics. It wasn't a huge amount, but we were perfectly happy to get this stuff harvested and have someone take it down to the 1 or 2 places that we constantly used. And we'll be doing that again. It wasn't like we grew it all for us. So in summary, it was an interesting year. It was a whole lot more fun, I think, than some of us thought it would be, and we're looking forward to trying it again and developing a taste for okra. So watch us on Okra, the Okra channel.